My name is Kathleen, and at 29 years old, I had no plans of leaving my apartment that morning. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table, emails waiting, unfinished projects scattered across the screen, the kind of routine I usually let consume me. Yet something unsettled pressed against my chest, a nameless restlessness I couldn't shake. I poured myself another cup of coffee, glanced at my banking app, and found nothing unusual. Still, the feeling lingered. It made no sense. I'd managed my finances online for years. The Belmont Avenue branch was barely a mile away, and I almost never went inside anymore. But as I stood at the window, watching the late morning sun slide across the neighboring rooftops, a single thought rose in my mind, sharp as a command: go to the bank. I tried to brush it off. If you've ever felt betrayed by the very people who were supposed to be your strongest supporters, let me know where you're watching from. I had no real reason to go. My bills were on autopay, my rent cleared, my freelance deposits direct. Nothing required me to show up in person. Yet the urge refused to loosen its grip. By the third time I circled the apartment, pretending to straighten things up, I sighed, grabbed my bag, and gave in. The drive was quick. The weekday streets hummed quietly, only a few cars at each light. A mother pushed a stroller. A man in a suit checked his watch. I turned into the branch parking lot, expecting the usual mid-morning buzz. But it was nearly empty, only 2 cars at most. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, telling myself this was pointless. Still, I opened the door. My fingers brushed the edge of my debit card inside my bag, the same card I carried since college. I thought of the years I'd worked to build a fragile independence, juggling contract work, saving for my own place, pushing back when my parents insisted they knew better. Every step had been hard won, yet their shadows still reached over my choices. That morning, as I smoothed the wrinkles in my blouse and shut the apartment door in my mind as firmly as I had in reality, I told myself I could shut out their influence anytime I wanted. But as I stepped out of the car, a quiet certainty tightened in my stomach. I walked toward the bank's glass entrance, unaware that crossing that threshold would begin to shift the very foundation of my life. Inside, the air was cool and hushed, like a waiting room. I expected to see 1 or 2 customers at the counter, maybe a clerk arranging papers. Instead, my eyes locked onto 2 familiar figures near the manager's desk. My parents. They were dressed with deliberate neatness, as if this morning had been carefully planned. My father in a pressed navy blazer. My mother in a pale silk blouse she only wore for significant occasions. They stood close, speaking in low, deliberate voices. I slowed instinctively, not wanting to interrupt. The words reached me before I could stop them. "Our daughter doesn't recognize us anymore," my father said smoothly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who believed himself reasonable. "She forgets names, places. We've consulted doctors. It's progressing," my mother added softly. "We're only here to protect her. She can't manage her finances alone." My stomach clenched. My breath caught. They were speaking about me as if I weren't alive, as if I were already gone. The manager nodded along, flipping through a folder my father had given him. From where I stood, half hidden behind a tall divider, I could see my own name printed at the top of one page, Kathleen Mercer. My life reduced to a file, spoken of in the past tense by the 2 people who raised me. They looked so composed, so sure of themselves, like benevolent guardians doing the hard but necessary thing. Anyone else might have believed them. Maybe even I would have if I hadn't been standing right there, pulse racing, ears burning at each false word. I pressed my palm to the divider, grounding myself, because if I didn't, I might have started believing their story too. Then I stepped forward, each footfall echoing across the polished floor, carrying me out of the shadows and directly into their lie. The sharp taps of my shoes broke the spell of their performance. My father's voice faltered mid-sentence. My mother's hand froze on the edge of the desk. Both turned at once, their faces shifting from calm to brittle. "Good morning," I said evenly, though my throat burned. The manager blinked, glancing between us as if he'd stumbled into a play halfway through and realized the actors were improvising. My father recovered first, forcing a smile. "Kathleen, sweetheart, you weren't supposed to." "I wasn't supposed to what?" I cut him off. Here you declare me incapable of running my own life. My mother stepped forward, her voice soft, almost sing-song, as though soothing a child. Darling, you've been under stress. Sometimes you forget things. We just wanted to make sure. I forget nothing. The words burst out sharper than I meant, bouncing against the quiet lobby walls. I turned to the manager, locking eyes with him. My name is Kathleen Mercer. I am not under medical care. I have not authorized any guardianship. And I certainly recognize my own parents. His mouth opened, then slowly closed. He lifted the folder from the desk and held it out toward me like something fragile. My fingers trembled as I took it, but I didn't look away from the people who raised me. My father's jaw tightened. You don't understand. This is for your own protection. I let out a bitter laugh, sharp and empty. Protection or convenience? The silence between us thickened, almost tangible, like I could taste it. The manager slipped away quietly, excusing himself to another office, leaving the three of us caught in a triangle of truth none of us wanted to face. I clutched the folder to my chest, its weight pressing against me like a verdict already delivered. Without another word, I turned toward the door, each step heavier than the last as I carried their betrayal out into the daylight. At home, I placed the folder on my kitchen table, the laminate surface suddenly feeling far too small to hold it. For a long moment, I just stared at it, palms pressed flat against the wood, as though bracing myself against an approaching storm. Finally, I forced the cover open. Inside, the documents were neatly clipped together. Medical notes, statements, forms I'd never signed. The first page declared I was suffering from progressive cognitive decline. Another authorized guardianship to my parents, bearing signatures that weren't mine. Each sheet felt like a stamp of finality, as if my identity had already been stripped away and cataloged. My throat tightened as my eyes ran over line after line, my name woven through their lies. I remember my father saying last winter, "You're always forgetting where you put things." I had laughed then, after losing my keys, unaware he was planting a seed. And my mother's soft voice when I told her I was juggling too many projects. "You can't handle stress, Kathleen. You never could." At the time it felt like pity. Now it sounded like rehearsal. I flipped another page and saw the date of a supposed evaluation. That same week, I'd had a routine checkup, leaving with a clean bill of health. No decline, no warning. But here in black and white was a version of me I didn't recognize. Frail, confused, incapable. A version they had invented. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping across the floor. The folder sat there like an open wound, bleeding trust into everything it touched. All the late-night calls from my mother asking if I'd eaten, my father insisting he should manage my rent to make life easier. Each gesture now rearranged itself into a pattern I couldn't ignore. I pressed my palms over my eyes, trying to ease the weight in my chest. It didn't lift. It only hardened. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, pulling me back to the room, and to the confrontation I knew was coming. It rang again, even sharper this time, as if they were trying to rush me into answering. I opened the door. They were standing there side by side on my doormat, their faces set in polite concern. My mother's eyes flicked past me into the apartment, as though searching for the folder she already knew was inside. I stepped aside without a word. They walked in with practiced ease, too comfortable in a space that was supposed to be mine alone. I followed them to the kitchen, where the folder still sat untouched since I'd pushed it away. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and deliberately placed the folder in the center of the table between us. My father cleared his throat. "Kathleen, we didn't want you to find out like this. It's just a precaution. Nothing more. Precaution." My voice came out low. "These documents are forged. Those signatures aren't mine. And these medical notes? Fabrications." My mother reached for the folder, but I pressed my hand over it. She quickly pulled back, folding her hands in her lap. "Sweetheart, sometimes you don't see how vulnerable you are. We were only thinking about your future." I leaned in. "My future isn't yours to take. You don't get to erase me while I'm still alive." Silence stretched across the table. My father tapped his finger against the wood once, twice, but said nothing. My mother kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Their stillness was heavier than any argument. I opened the folder and slid one sheet toward them. This says I'm unfit to make decisions. Tell me, when exactly did I become incapable? Was it when I moved out on my own? When I refused to let you manage my accounts? Or was it when I started saying no? Neither spoke. Their silence was the confession I'd been waiting for, louder than any excuse they might have offered. I closed the folder, my hand firm on its cover. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stood, pushing back my chair. They had nothing left to say, but I knew the fight was only beginning. I didn't sit back down. The weight of the folder pressed into my palm as I looked at them. Two people who had taught me my first words, held me when I cried, and now sat silent in the face of their own betrayal. Why? The question came out flat, stripped of emotion. Why would you do this to me? My mother opened her mouth, but my father spoke first, his patience cracking. Because, Kathleen, it's obvious you can't handle it. The trust fund, the deed, your accounts, they're better in our hands than wasted on your experiments. I froze. He hadn't meant to reveal so much. My mother's sharp glance toward him confirmed it. So that's what this is, I said, my voice hardening. Not about protection. Not about keeping me safe. You wanted control. You wanted the money. My father leaned forward, his tone sharpening. We wanted to make sure it wasn't squandered. You jump from job to job. Living like stability is optional. You don't think about what happens in 10, 20 years. Someone has to. The word struck like a blade. Not because they held truth, but because they dripped with the contempt my father had disguised as guidance for years. My mother's hand trembled as she reached across the table, her voice quivering. We didn't want it to reach this point, but you've been distant, secretive. We couldn't risk losing everything your grandfather left behind. I withdrew my hand before she could touch it. You mean your inheritance. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting your stake. The room froze. My father's jaw tightened, working like he wanted to argue. But the facade had cracked, exposing raw ambition masked as concern. I straightened, clutching the folder at my side like a shield. If that's the truth, then at least now we finally understand each other. Neither of them moved as I walked to the door. My father's muttered curse followed me into the hallway, but I didn't look back. I finally knew what I was fighting, and it wasn't confusion or doubt anymore. It was greed. The next morning, the folder still sat on the table, its shadow stretching across the room like an accusation. My head throbbed from replaying the confrontation, but beneath the exhaustion ran something steadier, resolve. By 9, I was on the phone with a lawyer I hadn't spoken to since college. His voice was calm and professional, but I caught the pause after I explained what my parents had tried. Bring everything, he said. Every document, every note. We'll untangle this. When I hung up, I called my financial advisor. The conversation was brisk, almost clinical. I revoked every authorization tied to my parents, canceled hidden transfers, and reset every password. Each confirmation email felt like a lock clicking shut. At noon, I sat across from my lawyer's desk, the folder open between us. He skimmed the pages, shaking his head. These signatures are forged. The medical reports barely hold up. This won't stand in court. His certainty felt like air I hadn't realized I needed. Then came the harder part. Do you want to update your will? He asked. I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, a full revision. And I want everything redirected. To whom? My cousin Maris. She's 12. Too young to be dragged into this. Too honest to know betrayal. He wrote it down without comment. I pictured Maris's gap-toothed grin, the fierce hug she still gave me when I visited, and felt something steady inside. If my parents wanted to treat me as a burden, then I would make sure their reach never touched her. By the time I left his office, the sun was dropping low. My accounts, my will, and my future were no longer theirs to control. All that remained was the confrontation waiting at home. When I walked into my apartment that evening, they were there. My father stood at the window, arms crossed, while my mother sat stiffly at the table. The air was heavy, like a storm building before clouds appear. You've made a mess, my father said, irritation replacing any pretense of concern. Freezing transfers, calling lawyers. Do you think this will end well for you? I set my bag down and met his gaze. It ends better than the future you tried to script for me. His jaw tightened. We were protecting you. No, I said, pulling out a fresh set of documents my lawyer had given me that afternoon. You were protecting your claim. I know about the attempted transfer of my condo deed. You filed it last month. For the first time, my father faltered. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, but she didn't deny it. You forged signatures, faked evaluations, and now you tried to steal my home. I placed the papers on the table deliberately. As of today, every guardianship claim is revoked. Every authorization nullified. You'll never touch another part of my life again. My father stepped toward me, his voice low. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I replied. I'm ending this. The silence that followed was colder than any argument. My mother finally whispered, Callista, we only wanted. I cut her off. You wanted control. And now it's gone. They stayed frozen as I slid the papers back into my bag. Their stillness was almost eerie, as if trying to imagine a version of me that would fold again. But that version no longer existed. I walked to the door, my keys loud in the quiet, knowing the next time I faced them, it wouldn't be on their terms. I had barely closed the door when a hard, insistent knock came. Opening it, I found my parents on the threshold, their polished calm stripped away. You're ungrateful, my father spat. Everything we've done for you. Your schooling, the roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? My mother's voice wavered, though her words stayed sharp. You've always been reckless, Kathleen. We stepped in because you can't manage alone. You'll thank us one day. I steadied myself against the frame. No, you didn't step in. You stepped over boundaries, over trust, over me. Don't twist this into care. My father's face reddened. You think independence makes you strong. It makes you blind. We were protecting you from yourself. Once, their words might have cut. Now they rang hollow, echoes of a script they'd rehearsed too long. I saw it clearly. Their version of protection was simply control dressed up as concern. I'm not your project, I said quietly, and I'm not your possession. Whatever story you've told yourselves, it ends here. For a moment, silence hung between us. My mother's shoulders sagged as if she might cry, but no tears came. My father's jaw locked, refusing defeat. Without another word, I stepped back inside and closed the door. The sound of the latch was sharper than their voices, final in a way no argument could be. I leaned against the wood, heart pounding. But for the first time in days, my pulse felt like it belonged only to me. The apartment was silent again, waiting. I knew the next step was mine alone. The quiet settled like a heavy blanket at first, then warm. I walked slowly through the apartment, brushing the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, the cool window frame. Everything here was mine, not because I bought it, but because I defended it. The silence that once felt empty now carried a different weight. It wasn't loneliness. It was proof. I brewed tea, letting it steep as I pulled my journal from the shelf. Its pages were filled with fragments of me, lists, half-finished thoughts, words I'd never said aloud. I sat at the table where the folder had been and opened to a blank page. My pen hovered, then moved steadily. Let no one define your mind who wouldn't trust your heart. The words came easily, more certain than anything I'd written in years. I underlined them once, then closed the book. For a long moment, I sat with the sound of the kettle clicking as it cooled, the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. My parents were gone, but their absence no longer felt like loss. It felt like space. Space I had reclaimed. Space where I could finally breathe without their shadows crowding me. I sipped my tea, its warmth grounding me, and leaned back. I had lost something irrevocable. Yes, but what remained was mine alone. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for approval or permission. I wasn't defending my choices. I was simply living them. The night deepened outside, and I let it. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight belonged to me and me alone.